Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Special because it is number 500 of these videos. I've said hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things 500 times. And what I have whizzing around in front of me today are the new Japanese Infantry from Warlord Games. Except for the fella that just went past. He's actually one of the classic plastics, but there's a reason he's included. And hopefully that's pretty obvious. The fact he doesn't stand out so much might be encouraging for folks that already have a large Japanese collection. Anyhow, the uniforms for these guys are pretty interesting, and what I've got for you is 3 different methods to get that look. The paints for these will be listed in the description below, the same as always. So, without any further mucking around, let's get started. So, real quick up top, because I know folks are going to be curious about this. On the left-hand side is one of the previous plastics generation of Japanese infantry, and on the right-hand side is one of the modern ones. Now, side by side, I think you can see that, obviously, if this fella stood up a little bit, they'd be more or less the same size. The proportions on the modern plastics quite closely match the originals. So if you were worried that getting some of the new toys was going to make your old collection look a little bit funny side by side, don't think that's going to be the case at all. They will fit in, and it looks within the realm of normal human variation in height. Now, because I want to show you 3 separate ways of painting the uniform, there are 3 separate figures. Now, the fella on the left here is primed in Desert Yellow. Now, it's a spray can from Vallejo, and the other 2 fellas are primed in Zandri Dust. Now, one of them I'm going to leave just Zandri Dust, and I think that's going to quite closely match the brownish color of the uniform that we see in the recent method that Warlord have been painting their Japanese infantry. Now, while looking up the actual color, it's one of those situations where uniform isn't, because the color itself is described as a khaki with slight mustard tones. So if we look at the uniform color, which is actually called Japanese Uniform World War II, getting a little bit of this out of the bottle, it is, to my eye, more mustard than khaki. It is quite yellow. And there's nothing to say that you couldn't use this. Of course, the Japanese army was having the same sort of supply problems that everybody else was. Dye quality in the 40s is not the same as it is today. The amount of times that these things would have been washed in the field, how sunlight affects, whether or not they're wet. There's all sorts of ways that just picking any yellowish brown will work perfectly well. So I'm going to use a couple of different ones today. I'm not going to use Japanese Uniform World War II because you can see that in other videos. I am going to show you a couple of alternatives which I think are going to quite closely match the look. So to start off with our brave volunteer here, what I have is green ochre. Now I'm going to pop in the description a bunch of alternative colors that you could use here, because this, to my eye, this is khaki with a sort of mustard touch, and it's a little bit faded. It's quite fitting for a uniform that's been in the field for a while, maybe has been washed a couple of times, and it is reminiscent of the yellowy kind of tint from the Japanese uniform bottle. All the same, it's a little bit lighter and not quite as intense. It's not as yellow, so it suits what I see when I look into these uniforms. All the same, it's a little bit thin, so you'll probably need to go over this a couple of times, but you do not need to be careful as you're doing it. So struck it over everything, and if you have got a fellow who's got the helmet cover on, then of course you'd paint this in at the same time. Now you might even find that easier to do with this color if you start from a slightly lighter primer, maybe a bone or something. But to my eye, that's I hesitate to say right color, but that's what I will be painting my guys with. Now what I'm going to do is the same step for all 3 miniatures. And that is to take here some dark sand, just a little bit on one of my wedge tip dry brushes. And I'm going to work that off into some kitchen towel. And dry brush here first along the edge of his base to get an idea of what I'll leave behind. What I want to do is to introduce some texture to the uniform, because this is the fastest way to breathe a little bit of life into, especially bulk infantry. It'll lighten them up a little bit, and a little bit more visual interest on some of these flatter areas as well. It's not going to beat a proper, careful highlight, But when you're painting 30, 40, 50 guys for a platoon, quick doesn't hurt so much. Now, anywhere that you're worried you have applied too much, what you can do is come back with the base color and sort of buff it off from some areas. But I would suggest you want to hold your nerve and apply maybe a little bit more of this than you might think. So like I said, all three fellas, away we go. Let's dry brush with some dark sand. So at the moment, a little difficult to get all three in shot, but you can see the difference in color between the three of them. We have our military brown khaki-ish kind of fella. We have our slightly more mustardy looking dude. He's not too bad. And then we've got our slightly more yellow, much closer to the Japanese uniform out of the bottle look. So what happens next is all of these guys are going to be painted in the same way. So I'm going to put these two fellas aside, but you're going to see me doing each step. I just realized I haven't hit record there. So what I am using, this is flat flesh for his skin. Having been to Japan a couple of times, what I can tell you is that Japanese people, they're not yellow, so don't go mixing in sepia tones and stuff like that to your skin tones. The color difference, I would say, is in a little bit of the absence of the red that you'll see in, for example, my skin tone. It's a little more olive. Now that is probably worryingly pale at this stage, but don't worry, we have got a little more to do. What I'm going to turn to now is English uniform, and we're going to paint in the water bottle on his equipment. This, you can just smear that straight over the top. Flat earth, even a brown, it doesn't matter too much. Now for their belts and leather equipment, what I'm going to use is Tree Ancient from the Army Painter. Now this is a little bit darker, maybe a touch more red than flat brown from Vallejo. But that will also work quite well, like if you're trying to stick to one manufacturer for some reason, or if you just can't find this locally to you, it's no problem. Parts of the bayonet frog are also in this color, so I'm just going to blap some of that there. Now for most of the canvas equipment, what I'm going to use is Toon King Tan. This one is from the Army Painter. It's basically German camo beige, just a little bit more neutral. It also covers a bit better, which is why I'm a little bit more of a fan. So over straps, his chin strap on his helmet, for example, it's another one you're going to want to put this onto. You can also paint in their leg wraps with these, but we might instead here turn to Khaki from Vallejo. Now this is pretty standard. Army man khaki, and it will turn just a little bit more green as it dries, especially once we go ahead and shade it. Now you can, because you'll see on the front of this fella's foot here, maybe there are cross straps where he's actually tied the wraps around his legs. Now, if you want to be fancy, you can go ahead and paint the khaki in first, and then paint those straps in with a different color, maybe like the tan that we just used earlier. I am not going to be fancy, because I don't want to be fancy on the bleeding leg wraps for 40-odd infantrymen. So the whole thing is going to be the same color on my guys. Now for the wood on their rifles, what I'm going to turn to here, this is flat brown from Vallejo. Now this is quite a nice, it's a deep brown, quite warm, and it leans more towards orange than red, which is what the ruddy browns from Army Painter do. So it's nice and complementary and also covers extremely well. This is a little bit easier without the camera in the way. Now for his shoes, I'm going to use here leather brown from Vallejo. This is actually quite close to Brigandine brown from Army Painter. Anything, it's a leathery brown. Pick one you like. And then we'll start filling in some of the black details. Now there's generally quite a few little sneaky bits of black material on these guys, like the bayonet cases, for example. Parts of the Shingunto, I believe is the name of the swords off the top of my head. Parts of the metalwork on the weapon itself. And some fellas, like if they've got mustaches and similar, A fine brush, a bit of patience, and some black is going to be your solution there. But let's go around now and fill in these bits. When it comes to helmets, you've also got a few options too, because there was green helmets, and you'd also end up with some that were kind of similar to the actual uniform itself. Now obviously if you're painting a covered helmet rather, it will be literally the same color as the uniform. But what I have here, this is green-brown from Vallejo, and this is a painted, I want to say greenish-brown, that's literally the color's name, but this is pretty good for the painted tin helmets. But also accurate could be this more green, or much more green. This is US Olive Drab. This used to be Brown Violet before they changed the name, because it is neither brown nor violet. That's quite funny really, because these guys are really easy to paint, but there's so many little just finishing touches. So what I have is gunmetal and bayonets and what have you. Swords, I'm going to use this. You may even choose a lighter metallic color here, but this is what I'm going to use. Now for stars on helmets and caps, I'm going to use here a little bit of tan yellow. You really don't want very much of this on your brush at all. Don't worry too much if your star shape isn't perfect. Just a wee blob in the right spot is going to be fine. And then the final detail to apply is going to be a little bit of vermilion on the collar tabs. This is going to be much easier without a camera in the way for you. Once I've done with this, what I'm going to do is just cruise around, go back to my base coats anywhere that I need to, and tidy up, making ready for our wash. Now what I'm going to use for the wash is marine juice. Now if you've never come across this before, this is from an old army painting method used by the Forge World team. I've had to tweak the recipe a little over the years because Citadel keeps changing the contents of their pots, but long story short, what it is now, this is a bottle each of Reichland Flesh Shade, dark tone from the Army Painter, with Lamian Medium to finish it off. Now what this gives us is a shade that will settle very, very easily, flows off the brush, looks a little more intense coming on the miniature at first than it will do as it dries. You still don't want any big pools of it anywhere, but we can apply this over everything, and it's going to give us nice simple shading without having to come back and bring everything back up by going over with the base colors again. The other idea here is that because it has a little bit of, like I said, a little bit of warmth in there, over the skin tones, it's not going to look quite so unnatural anymore. But all the same, this is going to go over everything on all three miniatures. And then we'll take a look at what that looks like once it has dried. Give it about half an hour. Now once those have dried, there's the uniform colors that you're going to get from those three methods. I do actually quite like the Zandri Dust Guy more than I thought I was going to. And I think this fella here is what I would say is the closest to a faded, lived-in uniform that you're going to get. But if you want to churn them out real quick, I know this is the older plastics, but this fella with that desert yellow, bit of a dry brush and some details done, I mean, that's pretty quick. But from here, rather than just varnishing them and popping them on the table, let's take things a little further, one or two extra highlights just to make them stand out a bit more. So to take the skin a little bit further, what I'd suggest is we can add a wee bit of warmth here. I have Reichland Flesh Shade and Lamian Medium, half and half. I'm going to apply just a little bit of this over the skin. You don't want to go crazy with it, but a little bit of heat, something that doesn't make them look quite so flat, is going to work well here. Now this is literally just called Basic Skin Tone from Vallejo, and we're going to go ahead and pop this on his nose, chin. I'll also do the backs of his knuckles off screen. Painting skin tones is a bit of a funny one, you want to find the right thing to look right on the table, but without being super cartoony. What I'd suggest is that Vallejo also has in their game color range quite a handy flesh wash, so experimenting a little bit is well worth the time. Now I'm going to grab here some skeleton bone, This is quite light, but what I'm going to use it for is to brighten up some of the straps and a couple of the edges of the equipment. Don't feel as though you need to highlight every little line there. Just a quick slash across the back there will do the job. And the same too, I need to keep them in shot here, any little straps, just a little bop of this at the corners and edges, and this will look quite sharp. Okay, now what I'm going to do is take these fellas outside. I'm going to hit them with a matte varnish spray. Go ahead and pop a base on them, and the recipe for that will be in the description. Let's get a look at what they look like when they are all finished. And so there at last, our Japanese infantry are complete. And I hope you see that there is a bit of a difference there between all three of them, but they're all in that realm of possibility for these uniforms. Now the Special Naval Landing Force, they are going to deserve their own video, so I want to do a little bit more research on those guys before I commit, but hopefully there are some ideas here which might point you in the right direction for them as well. Now, as I said at the start of the video, this marks How I Paint Things 500. So I want to say thank you to you all for sticking around with me this long. It has been one subject after another, from historical, fantasy, science fiction, whatever I have wanted to paint from one week to the next, really. And the fact that folks have, you show up regularly and comment and like and share, it means the world. It keeps me doing this. So, with all sincerity, thanks goes out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment that makes this possible, as well as all of my patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my most wonderful producers who are showing up on screen now. Your support makes a difference, folks. I really mean it. You've kept this channel going for longer than I think it might deserve, but hey, that's for fame and fortune to determine. So any questions or anything, folks, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram, they're both linked down there too. So again, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.